Today, despite it being a blustery, rainy day in Portland, Oregon, Rick LePage and I are going to walk through how to practice and train and then photograph the great eclipse coming on April 8th. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson.
And Rick.
And we're here in my studio because it's pouring rain outside. We were hoping to do this thing outside with the sun to talk about how to practice and then actually photograph the eclipse. This is a really exciting ATS. We're going to go through, we're going to talk about exposure settings you should use at different base ISOs for capturing both the partial eclipse and the moment during totality. For those of you who are going to be fortunate enough to be in the zone of totality, we will be leading a workshop in Mazatlan, Mexico with a great group of people. And we're going to kind of give you some of the same training tutorial that we're going to give our group in Mexico. And I'll talk to you about how we're planning on practicing with those nice folks before the actual event.
That's the key point, is practicing.
Yeah, you don't want to be photographing the sun with your filtration system of choice and getting all your camera settings figured out the day of. It's easy for you to get the partial eclipse portion of this, which is the lion's share, figured out yourself with your camera and your support equipment and your filtration. And we're going to talk about all the stuff that you should think about having with you at the eclipse. And that goes from like a warm jacket for the moment during totality where the temperature drops 20 degrees to everything else. And we're going to emulate the sun with this cool little hot light that I've got up here. And we'll talk about everything that you need to know about capturing both the composite image with the phases of the sun in a landscape, as well as those tight shots of the partial eclipse, as well as the total eclipse with your long lens. All right, so I would say the little list of things that you need for the eclipse. You need, if you want to capture that big, beautiful image of the eclipse during totality and the chromosphere and maybe some of those Pac-Man-like images of the partial eclipse, large, I really think about a 400 millimeter lens on full frame is what you're looking for. You could be slightly, it'd be good on APS-C too, but the chromosphere fills a good part of the frame at 400 millimeters if you're shooting on full frame. If you're on a crop sensor, you might even want to drop down to 300 millimeters just to be a little bit safe that you're going to get that chromosphere effect that you want. For the landscape shot that has the phases of the eclipse moving through it with totality in the center, I think somewhere 20 to 30 millimeters. I think a 24 to 70 millimeter lens is pretty safe for that. I'm even going to use a 28. I used a 35 millimeter lens for this image during our 2017 Great Eclipse where we ran our first workshop and I photographed my first eclipse. And it worked out fine. You can see that the sun sort of moved out of it a little bit, but depending on your composition, I really think a 24 ought to work.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so, the complication is going to be if you want to do both of those things at the same time. Yeah. You're going to have to do a little bit of that patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. And you want to practice.
Yeah, you want to practice.
Practice, 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 practice. All right?
Yeah. I notice here that you've got 2 tripods set up with 2 cameras on it. Mm-hmm. If you want both of those shots, totality and this other, the partial eclipse.
In landscape, small.
You're going to need 2 tripods and 2 cameras? Is that what you're thinking?
I think you need 2 cameras and 2 tripods. And I think the one that you're shooting with the long lens, if you've got a tall tripod, it's a lot nicer to be looking through it like this than like that off and on for 2 hours through this whole event, 2.5 hours. Your back is going to get really sore. I think wherever you're going, you want a little folding chair. I've got one from REI that I love. I'm not using this one from the studio, but you're going to want to sit down. There's going to be 5 minutes between frames when you're doing the composite shot. I think having a little folding chair, a sun hat, sunscreen, a good bottle of water or 2, and a printout of the exposure settings that you want to use with your camera. And we have kind of a beginner's guide that we're going to make available to you. You click right up here and you can go over to the place on my website to download that. It's also in this video's full description. I just crumpled mine sitting on it. But it's set up for people that have different cameras with different base ISOs. 50 base ISO, that's like my Leica Q3. 64 ISO, which is like my Nikon Z8, Z9. 100 ISO, which is my ZF. What's your
100.
100. So,
Yep.
and you're gonna want to shoot as much of this as you can at your base ISO.
Yes, yeah.
And what's the reason for that?
Widest dynamic range.
Widest dynamic range.
Yep.
Ability to capture the most highlights and shadows at the same time when you're photographing. So we're going to go through, we're going to talk about a little bit of this stuff, and I think we're going to start with the long lens shot. We're going to look at these as two separate things, and then we'll talk a little bit about how somebody wanting to do both at the same time would strategize. Okay, so we'll start with thinking about your long lens shot. And I think
This is totality.
well, I think we should actually talk about from the moment that the sun is full and round in the sky through the different phases of the eclipse. And you should become familiar with that. You may have watched other videos. There's people talking about the C1, C2, C3, C4. You want to explain what those are?
Yeah.
No.
C1 is where the moon starts
To take the tiniest bite out of the sun.
Right. C2 is halfway.
C2 is
C2
when
is-
C2 is when it
Yes.
goes into totality, where it moves in, and it's like that moment when you start having that diamond ring effect. Maybe there's a little sun star as the moon starts to completely cover the sun, and only the smallest sliver of it's left.
Yeah. And then C3
Is when that happens again as it leaves, as it's moving off the surface. The end of totality, the incredible, like, mind-altering, wow, 2 to 4 minutes that you get is coming to an end. And it's going back to the Pac-Man slices where you need your glasses. That's something we didn't mention.
No, glasses. We need glasses.
We need glasses. You put these glasses on, and, oh man, can you see anything, Rick?
I can't see anything.
I can't see anything. Nothing. You're only going to be able to see the sun. You're going to be able to look right at it through these, but you won't see anything else. It reminds me when I was a sailor in the Navy when I was a kid, when I was 19 to 23. They were just starting to do night vision goggle operations on the flight deck. And you would have two landing signalmen, the yellow shirt people on the flight deck that guide the helicopters in to land. And one had night vision goggles, and he could see the helicopter. And the helicopter had no lights on. The ship was blacked out. And they had these little Kylum light sticks stuck to the side of the helicopter that were specially made so that only night vision goggles could see them. And then the guy who was standing beside him had no night vision goggles, and it was just pitch black and couldn't see anything. And the guy guiding the helicopter in could see the helicopter, but he had no depth perception whatsoever. And the pilot wore night vision goggles, and we had little Kylum light sticks taped all over the flight deck, and he could see the flight deck, but he had no depth perception, and the co-pilot didn't have any night vision goggles and had no depth and could see nothing at all. And the idea was that the four of those people could somehow land it safely on the deck. And because I worked on the fuel crew, I had my whole fuel crew around the other side of the hangar, hiding behind a forklift, ready to fight the fire when everything went haywire. So it's kind of like that with the eclipse too. You know, you've got the sun is blazing up there. We're going to simulate that here. The sun is blazing up there. And while you're walking around doing stuff, you're either got your regular glasses on or no glasses at all. You need these to just turn and be able to look at the sun, all right? But, you know, the minute you look away, it's just black and you don't see anything. So during the partial eclipse, don't look at the sun without these on. It's going to burn your retinas. You're not going to be able to see anything. And the beauty of mirrorless cameras is you're not looking through the lens at the sun anymore. So you put your filtration on the camera. We'll talk about that in a second. And you're going to use these just to kind of basically sight the camera in on the sun. Now let's talk a little bit about filtration. That's a big topic of discussion. There's a lot of people out there saying nothing's safe except a solar filter.
Right.
And when we did the total eclipse in 2017, I used nothing but 16 stops of neutral density. And a lot of people recommended 16 stops of neutral density. For the landscape shot, I'm certain 16 stops of neutral density is safe. We shoot all the time with wide-angle lenses with the sun in the scene, doing sun stars and things like that, focused on the sun for minutes at a time, without a problem. If you've got a long lens and you're saying focus right on the sun, zoomed into 400 millimeters on your sensor, 16 stops of neutral density for not a prolonged period is going to be fine. I wouldn't leave it there for all 2 hours, all right? You're going to want to pull your hood off, and you're going to want to adapt your filter onto here, all right? So we've got our I'm using the case filters. I really think that the magnetic filters are going to be amazing for this particular eclipse. This is a 77mm lens, the 100 to 400 Nikon Z lens, and I'm going to thread this 77 to 82mm filter adapter onto it. Whoop, snug right in there. And I'm not pointed at the sun right now. I can put either a single 16-stop neutral density filter or a 10 and a 6-stop filter. We'll do a whole nother video on post-production after the eclipse is over, after we get back from Costa Rica, because we have kind of bing, bing, we're doing eclipse, then Costa Rica. But I'm just gonna stack a 10 and a 6-stop case Revolution neutral density filter on here in front of my lens. And then you're gonna wanna put this 82mm lens cap on. Now, some people might use the magnetic lens caps on case filters frequently. What the problem is it often pulls the filter off when you take the cap off. I love that the new Revolution filters take a pinch cap. It's as easy as just pinching to remove it, pinching and putting it in place, and it's locked on there.
And this is key.
This is key.
This is key for if you're going to be shooting the partial eclipse throughout.
Yeah.
You've got to have something to put in front of the filters.
When you're not shooting.
Yeah.
We're not recommending that you use 16 stops in neutral density and just leave it pointed at the sun for 2 hours. It's just for the moments when you're shooting, all right? And, you know, I would say there's no reason to shoot the thing more than every 5 minutes. This is a thing that lasts a couple of hours. It's not gonna change dramatically from minute to minute as the partial eclipse is happening and the moon's eating more and more out of the sun. You're gonna get the images that you want if you take a frame every 5 minutes, whether you're doing the landscape shot or your long lens shot. So, you know, with the long lens, I think it's important to put that lens cap in front of your lens, and you have a little timer on your phone. I got my phone in my mock lawn chair here, and you're gonna set a repeating 5-minute timer to just go bling, and you've got your exposure set manually. We'll talk about exposures in just a minute here. But you got your exposure set manually. You're gonna put your glasses on because you're looking up at the sun, and you're gonna kind of get set up, get your eyeball in the viewfinder. The viewfinder is just a television screen, so it's not hurting your eyes to look through it. And you're gonna essentially get dialed in on the sun. Let's see, I got way too much exposure right now. There we go. I'm set up, looking at the sun. I get my exposure set how I want it. I look away, I'm not looking into the sun. I take my shot, and then I'm gonna take my lens cap and put it back on. Then every 5 minutes or so, I'm gonna come back onto here. I'm gonna look through the viewfinder. You're gonna recompose because the sun's moving a little bit, and that's the beauty of a fluid head or a pan and tilt head. It's nice and easy to do. I'm gonna take my shot and put the lens cap back on. You're not gonna need to change exposure during partial. And you're gonna practice this. I want you guys to go out there and shoot the sun during the day.
Yeah.
It's not any different. You could do that the next sunny day. You can go out and start practicing this with your 16 stops in neutral density and your lens cap, all right? You can even use your eclipse glasses to look at the sun. It's the same thing. It's just gonna start having a little Pac-Man bite out of it as the totality is happening. So get out there, and we've got a cheat sheet for exposures. What's our partial eclipse exposures?
Partial eclipse exposures, f-stop 8, base ISO of 100, with a 16 stop, 800.
800, yeah, 800 of a second, right. Now,
and if your base ISO is 64, that's 500. If your base ISO is 50, it's 400.
Right. So we've got this listed out in a spreadsheet. You can download it and then go out and practice with the sun yourself and look at your histogram. You know, for those of you who are shooting Nikon, when you go ahead and hit play on a histogram that's got a photo, this is a photo of my little LED light here, you can zoom in while you're looking at your RGB histogram, and you can see that histogram actually changes.
That's a cool feature.
Yeah, not everybody does that, but as you scroll out, see now it's super underexposed, then you look at the sun, you can actually see, do I have the sun exposed where I'm not overexposing the sun through this crazy filtration? You can see that. So I would go out there and practice and look at your red, green, and blue histogram and figure out what the exposure for your camera at base ISO that you like is. You know, I'm choosing f8 or f5.6. With that neutral density, it's a slower shutter speed, and you're using a long lens, and we don't want to have shake-induced problems. So it's just going to keep your shutter speed in check to make sure you got a nice sharp image, you know, even if you bump it. You can use exposure delay or a cable release. I think an old school cable release is kind of a nice thing for this particular situation. Just plug it into your camera and hit the button. So every 5 minutes, your timer goes off, ding, you shoot that until we get to totality, and then everything changes. Now, there's another option for filtration. You know, you can use that 16 stop. I like the Case Revolution magnetic because they're so easy to pop on and off. Or you can use the 10 and the 6 stop. And doing it this way, capping it in between, totally safe in my estimation. And I've done it. You can see images where I was doing that really recently. The other option is the solar filter that people talk about. And let me show you how I like to attach that solar filter. Same Case magnetic ring, right? You're going to take the lens cap off. You're not going to need the lens cap at all through this stuff. This stuff is dense. I mean dense, dense. You take that 10 and 6 stop magnetic filter, those two off, and drop them back in your case. And what I've got here is a Case UV filter. It's an 82 millimeter UV filter. I put it out there. That's just lens protection. If I was shooting kiteboarding and blowing sand or working around salt water, it's just protecting the front element of my lens. That's all it is a clear protective filter. And then you can buy this Thousand Oaks black polymer solar filter off of Amazon. I'll put a link in this video's description. And you can also run over to my ATS links page, hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Click that link right there. And I'll have a little special total Eclipse section. And then I got to figure out where I opened this. I slit one piece of tape. This comes from Amazon with these pieces of tape on it. And it's silver on one side and it's black on the other. You want the silver side facing out. And all you're going to do is take that UV filter off, put it over the UV, put it over the magnetic ring and drop the filter back on. Boom. The magnetic filter is holding that in place. Then, you know, because you're going to be looking at the sun, switch to your Eclipse glasses for a second and get the thing generally lined up in the direction of the sun. Whoop. Anytime you're looking at the sun with your bare eyes, use this. The beauty of the mirrorless world is that we can look right through our camera's viewfinder and find the sun and focus. We didn't talk about focusing. You know, if you're working with a camera, you're going to practice this yourself through this filter. All right, you're going to practice it. I found that even through this insanely dark solar filter, the Nikon Z9 will focus on the edge of the sun and pinpoint AFS. It had no problem nailing focus on the sun. If your camera won't do that, you're going to want to focus on some infinity object way, way out. All right, and make sure that it's focusing. When you zoom in and check your image after shooting, you want to make sure it's sharp and in focus. Now, I have no issue just turning the camera off in between every shot because I know I can hit autofocus and it's going to nail the edge of the sun. It was easy. I just did it the other day on a sunny day. But, you know, if that's a problem for you and you catch focus at a far, far distance, you know, maybe you plug one of those Anker 20,000 milliamp PD capable batteries into your camera so that it's actually running off that battery pack so that you just leave the camera running the whole time. And that way your autofocus won't get lost. Anyhow, the exposure with the black polymer film, it was 800th of a second with the 16.5 stops.
60th of a second.
60th of a second. It is some dense stuff. And you don't even need to put the lens cap back on. You can just leave this thing pointed. You're going to have a hard time finding the sun through it.
Yeah.
When I looked through it, I was like, oh, there's this really dim object. That's when I realized I needed to roll the exposure way wide open.
Is one better than the other? Is it just this is?
So I found, and I'll show some images of this. Actually, maybe while I'm talking, I'll just throw them up here. The 16.5 stop filter, you get a, you know, it's that daylight kind of whitish image. It looks like a black and white image of the sun. With the black polymer solar filter film, it's very yellow. And you've probably seen some images of eclipses where it's really yellow like that. You're going to have a hard time color balancing totality. Well, you won't have that hard a time. You'll use color replace in Photoshop or something like that. Because your totality image is going to be without any filtration and it's going to look white like the neutral density filter images look. But this puts a really yellow, truly Pac-Man looking sun. It has a yellow tint to it. The solar filters have a yellow tint. And it's beautiful. It actually looks really nice. They come out a little fuzzy straight out of the camera, but don't worry too much about that. If it looks like this, it's not a big deal because when you pull the blacks down and you boost the contrast a little bit, it looks like this. It's just the fact that it's kind of got an aura of light emanating out of it. So I would play around with this, you know, shoot your own images of it, then pull the black slider to the left, pull the contrast to the right a little bit in Lightroom Classic or whatever your raw processor of choice is, and make sure that your sun images look good. Either filter, they look a little bit fuzzy, but you know, with just a little pull, you'll sharpen those edges by just boosting the contrast in the frame. Pull the whites up, pull the blacks down, boost the contrast just a little, all of a sudden it's nice, sharp. If you've got it in focus, it'll look in focus. So
go with the one that you're comfortable with.
Go with the one that you're comfortable with. You know, if you're freaked out by all the people saying it's gonna fry your sensor, by all means, get the black polymer film. If you love that yellow look, by all means get the black polymer film, but you're gonna take it off for totality, and it's not going to look like that yellow. It's going to be whitish blue, in fact. It's sunlight. This filter makes it look yellower than tungsten light. So there is that. I'd slip that guy back in its little cardboard. I can't remember exactly how much this was, but it's like less than 20 bucks. It's not a huge investment for you to make buying this solar film. And it just took a couple of days to get here. It's probably the same thing that's in the Eclipse glasses, or similar. All right, let's talk about the more complicated part, totality.
Okay.
So the minute that sun starts to become completely occluded, you're going to know what time it is. You're going to look at photographer's ephemeris or probably photographer's ephemeris.
I would use photographer's ephemeris. They've got a whole bunch of really good Eclipse stuff, both in their web app, which you can access on any device, and their iOS app. Sadly, they don't have an Android app anymore.
Yeah.
But they're great. I use them on the web all the time.
So I would just say that during your partial eclipse, you're going to be sitting down for 5 minutes, drinking some water, looking through your Eclipse glasses up at the sun, chilling out. Oh, time to take an image. And if you're doing both, you're going to be tripping both cameras, you know, putting the lens caps back on, sitting back down, waiting another 5 minutes. You got hours of that really chill pace, you know. And if you go out and practice this in your own yard with the sun at the same time of day, it's going to feel like old hat if you've done it a whole bunch. All right, so that's basically it for the partial. I mean, you're in manual mode, your exposure's not changing, you know your filtration, you just got to compose, focus, shoot, put your lens cap on, you know. Sit down for 5 minutes, your timer goes off, bing, time to get up again, pull my lens cap off, recompose slightly, probably move a little to the right, focus, shoot, you know, look through the viewfinder, don't look right at the sun with your eye, put your lens cap back on. And then, you know, you're getting down to that time where you know we're about to enter totality. And you know what that's going to be from photographer's ephemeris or whatever website you're looking at. And you know, when that happens, everything changes. You're gonna ditch your glasses, all right? You're gonna momentarily, just for that time during totality, you don't need them. Out goes the sun, and poof, all of a sudden things start to get dark and colder. Filters are coming off your camera completely. No more filters. You're not worried about damaging your sensor. Things are getting a little bit on the darker side, all right? Everything gets surreal. Take time to enjoy this. You know, seriously. If you've never been in a total eclipse before, it's an amazing. Hard to describe.
It is very hard to describe.
It's hard to describe.
The word "wow" comes up a lot.
Yeah, you're gonna hear a lot of people saying "wow." Wherever you are, there's gonna be people, and you'll hear people saying "wow." Okay. This is where things change a little bit, and it gets more complicated, and it gets a little more frenetic, and it's difficult to practice. You're just gonna have to pretend that an eclipse is happening, and you know how to get your camera dialed into all the settings we're about to talk you through, okay? You're gonna wanna know how to make your camera bracket. And I'm a big advocate in general out in the landscape, shooting directly into backlit sunsets of just 3 frames, 3 stops apart. This one's different.
Yeah.
Every little nuanced shot. You take a look at these images, these 3 images are all shot 1 stop apart during totality. You can see actual sun flares coming off the side of the sun from behind the moon over the moon's mountains, and you can see a little bit of chromosphere, and then those start to get burned out as you get more chromosphere, and then more chromosphere. Each one is different, and we're gonna talk, we'll do some videos on how to combine these images into a single image after the fact, but you're going to want to capture each one of those little pieces, and we're recommending 9 frames, one stop apart.
Yep.
And we've got the numbers for both that moment as the sun is going behind the moon and there's still just a little peeking out, and you can get that potential diamond ring effect. Yeah. We're going to stop our camera down. You're actually going to change exposure settings. I want you to have a cable release on your camera because the exposures are going to be, you know, you just want to make them fast and furious. I mean, those of you with the Sonys, you can hit a button and it takes all 9 frames.
Right.
For the Nikons, you usually have to hit one custom function button for burst and the shutter button. Yeah. I'm going to say, put it in manual mode, get your 9 frames, you know, one stop apart in the bracketing mode set up, know how to do that, and then you can just hit the button, shoots all 9 frames. That quick and easy, boom, you're done. You're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna get the sun centered up in there, focused, and then, you know, the minute that it starts to just completely fade out and it's losing, you pull that filtration off, all right? You're set up with your 9 brackets, ready to go. You've got the exposure setting off this chart.
Yep.
And for that moment that there's still just a blink of sun coming around the edge, it's different than the moment of totality.
Yes.
What's our, and actually it matters what your maximum shutter speed's capable of on your camera.
Yeah, mine is 0.008 of a second. A lot of them are.
A lot of them are 0.008 of a second. The Nikon Z9 and the Nikon Z8 go to 32,000th of a second, which gives you a little bit more leeway in this in bracketing. Yeah. So I'm going to recommend for Nikon Z8, Z9 users or anybody whose shutter speed goes up to 32,000th of a second, you know, for us with the base ISO 64, I'm going to say set that shutter speed about 1250th of a second.
1250th of a second.
Set it at 1250th of a second, f11, and just fire those bursts over and over as that sun is going behind the moon. When it's completely behind the moon, we're going to change exposure a little bit again. All right. For those of you who have a more limited shutter speed and a higher base ISO,
you're still going to do, you're going to do 2,000th of a second. Or 1,000th of a second at f16. You want to go up to f16 on this one.
Right. And you're still probably not going to get that last underexposed stop because your camera's going to max out at 0.008 of a second.
Yeah, for 2 frames.
For 2 frames, yeah. So 2 of your frames are going to be the same exposure at that 9 frame bracket. You're going to get an underexposed frame at 0.008 of a second and then another underexposed frame still at 0.008 of a second. But you'll get 8 stops of exposure bracketing around that optimum exposure. You should have it in there. Yeah. So the minute that the sun goes completely behind the moon and all you have is that aura chromosphere and everybody around you is going, whoa, look at the little moon shadows on the ground. Oh my God. Look at the little moon shadows on the ground. You got a few minutes here, but you're also going to want to switch your exposure, and we got this chart for you all.
F11.
You know, go to F11. No matter what camera, you get a little better image usually at F11 than F16. And, you know, if you're at 100 ISO, you're going to go to 500th of a second. There's not a whole lot of light coming out. Yeah. And you're going to go to that 500th second. Make sure you're focused. 9 frames. 9 frames. All right. And then this is, if you've got it, you look at it, they look good on the histogram. They look sharp. You've got totality. Yeah. You got totality. Enjoy your moment. Maybe you do your landscape shot we're going to talk about in a second and enjoy your 2 to 4 minutes. Shouldn't take you more than a few seconds if you've been practicing this and you know how to set up your camera and you know how to do it. All right. Then you're going to get another shot at the Bailey's beads diamond ring moment as the sun starts to come out the other side. Yeah. And that, you know, once you've got your shot, go back to f16 if you have a limited amount of shutter speed. Go back to 1250th of a second if you're shooting with a Z8 or a Z9 at f11. And fire those bursts through the Bailey's beads. The minute it starts to get bright again, boom, your filters and your cap are back on. Yeah. 5 minutes later, go back to your settings for partial eclipse. You know, and then every 5 minutes you're back in your lawn chair. If you want to get it coming out the other side, and the Pac-Man's the other way. Yeah. And that's basically it for shooting the long lens version of this. It changes just a little bit for that composite shot of the landscape. In some ways simpler, in some ways more difficult. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right. So we've talked through the long lens shot. Let's talk about the landscape sort of composite shot, you know, that you see a lot of, like this image that we did in the 2017 Eclipse, where you've got all the phases. Yeah. Small in the frame, wide angle shot. in many ways, it's similar to what we just did with the long lens. You're just not having to recompose, and work on. You're going to lock down and be in the same position, which is, set up right here. I'm probably going to take my Leica and my featherweight tripod with me to not have a whole bunch of extra weight in order to do that in Mexico, and just be set up alongside. And every 5 minutes, I'm going to take that shot with those same exposure settings with filtration. So I've got my magnetic adapter 49 to 82 millimeter right here, and I could either use that solar film in front of the Leica, but I'll probably go ahead and use my 16 stop neutral density filter, either the 10 and the 6 or the single 16 stop filter. And it's sitting in front of there, and I've got my lens cap on. So I'm not gonna leave it pointed into the sun forever. And this one, I don't want to move at all. So I'm gonna put a bunch of stones or hang a heavy camera bag off this stone bag. I'm gonna have this tripod rooted in place. I don't want it moving, all right? I can take an image of the landscape that I want. If I'm doing the whole thing in one frame, I can take an image of the landscape, bracket it a bit so I have a bit underexposed one, overexposed one. I can kind of get the exposure look that I want. And then, 5 minutes before C1, before the moon starts taking a chunk out of the sun, I want a shot. And I'm going to look at the scene with my phone, and I'm going to figure out exactly how the sun is moving through this during totality. And I'm going to make sure that my composition is going to catch from before the eclipse to after the eclipse all in the frame, all right?
Yep. And
then every 5 minutes, I'm going to trip a shutter, and all you're going to see when you review the image is black. You can focus it to infinity. With the Leica, that's really easy. You just spin it to the little infinity mark. You can zoom in and make sure that your shot of the sun is sharp. It's just going to be a tiny little circle in there. And all you're doing is capturing the circle and then the slight Pac-Man and the more Pac-Man. Every 5 minutes, you're going to capture an image that's a black frame with a little white circle, or if you're using the solar film, a little yellow circle in it. That's it. Nada más. Okay? During totality, if you're shooting both cameras at the same time and you're shooting the long lens camera, don't worry about capturing totality with the little camera. You can take that beautiful shot you've got, even the composite of it, and shrink it down and drop it into your landscape shot in the middle. You can skip that 5 minute interval with this one. You'll take the one 5 minutes before totality, you'll take the one 5 minutes after totality, and you'll just skip the totality because you don't need to worry about capturing a tiny little version of it. Capture your big version of it. If you are only doing this shot and this is all that matters to you, well then use the exposure settings, pull the filtration off, use the same exposure settings, bracket, 9 frames, a single stop apart, all the same exposure settings, just like we talked about with the long lens. You're just going to be capturing a tiny little eclipse, all right? And during the middle of totality, you've got this tripod rooted down, you're rock solid, you're using a tripod that you know isn't going to shift. Pull your camera off, all right? And well, if you're set up in a spot where you really like your, you don't even need to do that. If you're set up on the landscape as you want it, and totality is happening, capturing that moment where there's the sort of 360-degree sunset and the shadows on the ground look strange will be the thing you want to composite all those little suns into. So you're simply going to flip from that manual mode that you were working in to on the meter and bracket it. Shoot it bracketed.
3 stops.
Yeah, I mean, even just if you're doing the thing where you're capturing the sun at 9 frames, 1 stop apart, you might as well do that. Why change anything? If you're capturing it for the landscape scene, you can bracket 9 frames apart for the but bracket on the meter with the whole meter. You're not trying to get the sun. You're not working off this exposure sheet for the sun. You're looking at what the camera says for the entire landscape, and that's going to ignore that little speck of sun in your wide-angle lens. All right. You can use highlight weighted metering for one. You can use non-highlight weighted metering. Shoot it both ways. Make sure you've got the information you want in your histogram of your scene. Done. All right. And then you're going to go back again like we did with the long lens after totality is over to every 5 minutes shooting the partial with the partial eclipse settings that we talked about with your filtration in place and your lens cap on in between frames.
And your glasses.
And your glasses. Anytime you want to turn up and look at the sun yourself. All right. So a lot of people, I can hear some questions. A lot of people talk about, well, why not just use an intervalometer every 5 minutes? Because I really think that importance of, you could use an intervalometer if you're using the solar film.
How so?
Because the solar film is absolutely 100% so dense and so protective that you don't have to worry about putting your lens cap back on in between. If you don't care about that yellow image and you want to go ahead and use the solar film, I think that this image is optically a little bit better personally with the good quality neutral density. My technique is to use the 16 stops. And for those of you who already have a Revolution kit with the neutral density, the 3, 6, and 10 stop, all you got to do is stack the 6 and the 10 stop on here and a pinch cap. It's that easy. And you know, your phone has a real easy app, repeat timer. My clock app in the stock Android system, you can have it do a timer at the end of 5 minutes. It goes ding, 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 and you hit the restart, and it's setting another 5 minutes, and you just pull the cap off, focus, take the shot. With this camera, you don't even focus. Put the cap back on. 5 minutes later, you get up from your chair, you do it again. You know?
We're not talking to the millisecond for these things.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No. You're not going to notice the difference if it's 5 minutes and 10 seconds one time and
Right.
4 minutes and 40 seconds the next time. As long as around that 5 minute ding, you get up and capture an image, it's going to look great in your composite. And we'll talk about how to merge those composites. It's really easy. If you've got images that are just pure black with the little Pac-Man in them, and you have a night scene, a night-like low-lit kind of landscape scene, you can blend those with a simple blending mode on layers, and whoop, it won't take any work at all. It won't take any work at all. So that's basically it.
Yeah.
Make sure you have your Eclipse glasses. Make sure you have your choice of filtration. Make sure you have comfortable clothes, some shade, sunscreen, a good place to sit. Make sure you've practiced. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't show up the day of thinking, well, I watched Hudson and Rick's video, and I've looked at the photographer's ephemeris videos, and I've been online reading other people's things. No, go out tomorrow. Watch this video, go out tomorrow, use your filtration, check out your Eclipse glasses, take some pictures of the sun, check the histogram, figure out what you like, bring them in, edit them a little bit, you know, play with it, see what you think, practice, make sure you're good at it. Do it every week until the eclipse, you know, and then before the eclipse, do it the day before. I mean, seriously, get where you're really comfortable with it. Practice switching from those partial eclipse settings into the Bailey's bead diamond ring setting, from that into the chromosphere setting and back. And make sure you have that dialed and you know how to work it with your camera. Make sure you have spare camera batteries. Make sure you are prepared for any particular contingency. Bring a spare memory card in case your memory card goes bad. Have redundancy, all right? So I think you're gonna have a lot of fun with this eclipse. I know a lot of people say, well, you're crazy if you say 16 stops and neutral density is gonna protect your sensor with a long lens, but all the images I just showed you were taken with my cameras with 16 stops and neutral density, except for the ones with the solar filters. And I've shot thousands of frames of people and wildlife and, you know, all kinds of cityscapes and things in between, and you haven't noticed any burned out sunspots on any of my sensors, so.
And enjoy yourself.
Yes.
Enjoy the time.
Yeah, and I think practicing so that you're not in a panic at the moment of trying to figure it out, practicing and having it dialed and knowing it's stone cold and knowing exactly what you're doing with your camera and your settings. You know, if you know which of these settings is working with your camera, make your own sheet of it. You know, I have it set up here for people with different cameras, different base ISOs. Set up your own sheet, your own cheat sheet, however it works best for you. Have it on your tablet with you, your phone with you, printed out with you, big block letters. Make it simple on yourself and practice, practice, practice. This is gonna be a lot of fun. So we'll have an office hours where we talk a little bit about the eclipse after it's over and we get back from Costa Rica. You know, you can always sign up for our office hours. You just click this link over here, or you can run to hudsonhenry.com/office hours and join us for a big free group photography meeting.
And we'll also do a follow-up video about processing these images.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. There's some fun tricks in both. I like to use Lightroom Classic and then Photoshop to do it, where we can align the images even though we're not necessarily using a sun tracker. You know, move them around, get them aligned, and blend them with blending modes to get all the chromosphere put together using there's some
Yeah.
cool little tricks that we'll talk about. And then also simple ways to blend that landscape composite image. So stay tuned for all that. Have fun, enjoy yourselves. Take a moment to breathe and enjoy this crazy event. I hope you're all staying safe, staying creative. We're headed off to Charleston for a fun workshop kicking off in a week.
And then
then Mazatlan for the Eclipse. So it's happening soon, guys. I'm super stoked. All right, stay safe. We'll see you next week.